the bandwidth. But feel free to ask questions, okay? Thank you.
Yep, we like questions.
Yes, we do.
So interrupt. Can you all see my screen?
I can.
Sweet.
And I will say before we start, it is awesome to see a full page of SQL Saturday and
yes, agreed.
Data Saturday events. That makes me happy. That it's good to see that filling back out. I know that's not what we're here to talk about. I just thought I'd mention that. All right. Well, John, should we officially start?
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Okay. Yeah. I'm Matt Gordon. So I've been a data person for longer than I'll admit. I've been a data architect for roughly the last 8 to 10 years or so. And I've been working with AI professionally for about the last 8 too. So when the opportunity came up to present this topic back during the Learn Live, and then again for this group, I jumped right on it. Because that's all of this stuff is cool, and I think it's really good as data folks to have a little bit of an understanding of what AI is and isn't, how it works, and all that. So we'll dive into a little bit of that in this, all wrapped up in SQL database in Fabric.
Yep, and I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is John Morehouse. I'm a principal consultant with Denny Cherry Associates. I too have been working with data for longer than I probably will care to admit. We were talking earlier with Julie, like I remember working with 6.5, 7.0, so if that tells you anything. And like Matt, I think this move for Microsoft to bring AI to the database is really cool. I think it's really interesting to see this come to fruition. And I think we're going to see more of it as organizations start to learn how to bring AI into their data. So that's me.
All right. Let's go on to the next slide, which is a friendly reminder to ask us stuff. So we'll certainly do our best to answer if we don't know. The thing I've always liked about that is if you get asked something in a session like this that you don't know, it's a great excuse / nudge to go figure it out and write a blog post. Which I could certainly use the nudge to do that. So if you think it's over our heads, and it might very well be, one or both of us is going to go research that and then write something up that'll probably help all of us. So that's cool. So this, as you might know, this was presented back in December as part of a Learn Live series with Microsoft. So you're going to note the Microsoft-y looking slides. You're going to see the Microsoft demos that they've done and all of that, but it's being rerun basically for this group through March and April. So John and I are here, episode 3, and then there are 3 more that come 2 weeks from now, and then May 14th and May 28th as well. So if you enjoyed this, or if this is your first one, you're like, hey, this is cool, go back and watch the videos of the first 2, and then go make sure you go ahead and RSVP for the next 3 as well. John, do you want to talk about how awesome Vienna is and how great FabCons are?
Sure. Well, I would love to be able to go to Vienna, and we have to clarify a little bit. As Matt mentioned, most of this stuff is marketing from Microsoft. However, this slide specifically, I built. So I put in the link to go register for the European session. Matt and I just came off of the FabCon Vegas 2025 conference, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a great conference. They had like 7,000 attendees. The sessions were amazing. All the content was amazing. The community zone from Microsoft was amazing. So if you are able to get to Vienna and attend, and or I don't know, is the call for speakers open? I think the call for speakers is open.
The call for speakers is open and closes in 9 days.
So if you want to speak, get your session in there now. And if you can get to Vienna, I think that would be, this is Belvedere, Vienna. This is the picture of Belvedere. I would love to go. I think it would be a fantastic trip to go and partake in that conference. So there's a registration link there at the bottom. The QR code goes to that link. You can go get signed up and find more information via that link. So
yeah, they are great events. Of course, there's marketing stuff around, but you can avoid it. And yeah, I was really impressed with the quality of content. And it's not just Fabric stuff. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't work on Fabric at all, I'm still doing SQL Server, I'm doing Azure SQL, whatever. I
gave an Azure SQL database session. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, to Matt's point.
Cool. All right. So why AI integration? So I think this AI thing is here to stay. It's probably going to be around for a little while. But why are we talking about SQL Server with it? Um, so if you're, and it's hard to know, especially because we're not in person. I don't know everybody's kind of level of knowledge as far as how all this stuff works and all that. But folks that are plugged in a little bit to this stuff know that there's a lot of specialized vector databases, graph databases, all those sorts of things that are, they're designed to be suited for AI type workloads like this. And until several months ago, SQL really wasn't in that conversation. If you asked how you might have done this in Azure or around your Fabric data, there would have been a bunch of different answers, but it wouldn't have been, well, SQL. And that's because like we need to be able to store the vector data, and until some of these changes happened, um, SQL Server and Azure SQL weren't necessarily, they couldn't do that. And probably some of you, run fairly large shops, and if somebody comes to you and says, okay, you're running a bunch of SQL servers, you're running, um, maybe you're running Oracle, you're running MySQL, you're running Postgres, something like that. Somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm creating some AI powered applications, and I have a specific kind of vector database that I also want you to support and monitor and maintain and all that. You're not going to be super excited about that at all. Um, and it's probably something that you and your team likely don't know well. Maybe you don't know what the maintenance jobs are, how to support it, anything like that. So it's a whole bunch of upskilling while you're trying to keep the lights on with everything else as well. So that's why SQL kind of makes sense, and it's familiar to a lot of us. And you're going to hear John and I hit this point a few different times as we get into the demos and things like that. A lot of what you're going to see is T-SQL.
Yep.
It's stuff that's familiar to us. It's a lot of commands we know. Even some of the new syntax isn't crazy. Um, it's not. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're doing all this on databases and tools and systems that I think we all know pretty well. Anything to add there, John?
No, and I would agree that your comment about T-SQL made me think about the message from Microsoft is, even though they're bringing in this new functionality of like vector types, and we're going to talk about that, it's just still SQL behind the scenes, right? So in Azure SQL Database, it's really just SQL that we all know and love behind the scenes, and they continue that message throughout, adding new features. It's just SQL. That's all it is. And I think Microsoft is really smart to integrate AI, or the capabilities of AI, into SQL, because it's used all around the world, as we all know.
Yeah,
So I think that's really smart.
it is. It is. And yeah, that's, one of the, I didn't do Fabric SQL talks last year because obviously it didn't exist most of last year. But that was one thing that was interesting. I was able to present at a lot of SQL events, but do AI stuff, because some of what we're going to show later, like the fact that you can call REST APIs from Azure SQL, Fabric SQL, whatever. People didn't know that. Like, it was one of those things that they had put in the product, maybe not marketed particularly well, or maybe marketing kind of didn't know what to do with it. And that opens up a lot of things. So even if we get to the end of this hour and you're like, well, that was kind of cool, but Fabric SQL is not our thing. A lot of the stuff we're showing you, Azure SQL can do too.
Yep.
So if you're using that now, you can take those away and say, well, Fabric SQL, nah, I'm not going to mess with that yet. But you can take away some of the stuff we're going to show, and if you've got Azure SQL, you can do it right now.
Yep.
So pretty cool stuff. Why don't we go on to the next slide? All right. Yeah. So that is a good point. And John, I don't know about you, but obviously, like every consulting client right now, AI comes up somewhere.
Yep.
Hey, we need AI. We don't know what to do with it. What can we do with it? What can you do with it for us? All those sorts of things. But then the next question that comes up is like, well, we want it to run over data that we have. I don't want to bring like a chat GPT experience to my customers, internal users, whatever. Like, we need it trained on our knowledge bases and all that. So it kind of makes sense to give the database some AI-enabled functionality because the data is already there, versus having to wire up something else, different systems, different databases, things like that. So the vision certainly makes sense. So yeah, let's go on. Let's talk about data gravity. So long story short, what this concept means is that it's much easier to move the AI functions closer to the data than the data closer to the AI stuff. Whether you're using Fabric or not, a lot of the marketing around it and really a lot of the user experience is all built around this notion that you've got one lake that underpins all of it and that you don't have to move data to have the different workloads do their thing, whether you're doing ETL, whether you're doing straight SQL stuff, whether you're doing data warehousing, real-time intelligence, whatever. The data doesn't have to move. It kind of comes in and it's there, and you can do all these sorts of operations on it. So kind of the next logical step from there is to enable the AI functionality there, so you don't have this thing that's created to be kind of a single store for all of your enterprise data and then have to move a bunch of that somewhere else to do this stuff. So if you hear Microsoft people talk about data gravity and all those sorts of things, that's really all they mean, is like you bring the things you need closer to the data than taking the data, packaging it up, tossing it over somewhere else to do the AI stuff. So it's really no more or less advanced than that, unless John feels like I missed something or left something out there.
No, I think you're spot on. I think that as we look at organizations, and I don't know about you, but I am seeing more and more organizations that have many terabytes worth of data in their SQL Server environment.
Yeah.
I've got a client that's got 30 terabytes. That may be big or small, depending on your organization or how you view that. And I remember years ago that having a terabyte of data was unheard of. Like we had gigabytes, but we hadn't reached that terabyte level. And now it's more prevalent. I know of a company that's got a petabyte or more, trying to sling all that data around to go and take it to AI seems daunting to me. So the notion of data gravity and bringing AI and even new features that they might release down the road, bringing it to your data makes total sense to me.
Yeah,
totally.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go on and talk kind of what the three basic patterns we're going to see. So if you're building an AI application, and what you're going to see in the demos as they come later is we're building an AI powered application that's basically doing conference session submission stuff and things like that, which is another good reminder to put your submissions in for FabCon Europe or any of the SQL Saturdays you just saw. But really, so there's kind of three main types here. So vector search you may have heard of, and if not, we're going to explain what that means as we go. But it's basically storing the vectors and data together so you get consistent results. One of the things you may have noticed if you sat in on really any sessions around AI at all, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT or stuff over Azure SQL or whatever, you can sometimes kind of get inconsistent answers from some of these Gen AI things. And so that's bringing those together, storing them together, and kind of doing the same operations over them is going to help you get more consistent answers, which if you're making business decisions based on this, especially automatic ones, when we start to talk about AI agents and things like that, consistent, correct answers matter a lot. So that's the first pattern we're going to talk about. The next one is then, so you've got a RAG pattern. So if you're not familiar with that, it's retrieval augmented generation. I think I got that right.
Yep.
It's why it's abbreviated to RAG, because it doesn't really roll off the tongue anytime I try to spell it out. So what that means is, like it says there, you're basically trying to retrieve the most semantically relevant data. So it aligns with the words you're using, basically. And then you're using that data over and over again to ground the LLM for certain scenarios to do certain things. So you might be training it on data for a particular industry, or like a demo that I gave last year. It was a product list for a large store. And so as new products would arrive, you know, you'd kick that pattern off to bring that data in. So if the customer asked, you know, how many types of t-shirts do you sell, it knew the proper answer and then could speak to what those types were. Any other examples you can think of,
Nope.
John?
Nope. I think you nailed it there.
All right. And then last but not least, so the structured queries, kind of sort of trying to bring these two together where you've got the similarity search, you've got you're bringing the kind of constantly updated data in with RAG, and then the hope would be that you would put natural language with this over the top, so you are able to type a natural sentence and get the results you want back and have them be consistent and correct every single time. But before we're go ahead,
use your data.
Yes, yeah. Well, and that's really, you know, a lot of these demos and really like any community session that you would see on this at first, we were all using the same stuff. Like it was all the demo data sets, or we went to Kaggle and grabbed something. And then that next step is people like, well, that's cool, but I want to do it at work over my stuff. You know, it's my boss doesn't really care that I know how to do it. He cares if I know how to do it for us with our stuff. So yeah, that's really what all this revolves around. It's like the data you own, whether it's in Fabric SQL, Azure SQL, whatever, you're able to do this stuff over the top of it.
Yep.
So with that, we should show you how to deploy an Azure OpenAI resource, because if you don't know how to do that, none of the rest of the stuff will work. Yeah. And I think, as John and I point out the first time we gave this, it's frustrating sometimes when you go to a session on this stuff and it's super cool and you're like, oh man, that's great. I want to go home and mess with that right now. And then you realize the demo that didn't happen is how to deploy the resource. So you actually don't know what to spin up to do the rest of the cool stuff. So what this demo is going to cover here, and I'll be up front, it's a little dry because it kind of by nature has to be. We're creating a resource in Azure. There's no pyro here. There's no fireworks. It just kind of does its thing. And much as I think the first time John and I presented this PowerPoint, gets in a little bit of a mood. So what we do first is it creates a resource group, which is just a way, if you're not familiar with Azure, just a way to collect things that should go together, whether it's for a project, you know, department, division, whatever. So obviously we're going through here, we're adding a tag, which John, I don't know if you want to talk about it. Like, it's a good practice to kind of tag your resources.
Tag your resources. Who owns it? Please tag your resources.
Because oftentimes you have a lot of them and you're going to want that to figure out who owns it. You already know what it is. It's going to tell you that, but you may not know who owns it, and you know that can help you do that. So doing that, now we're going into the marketplace, which again, if you're not familiar, is basically how you create anything in Azure. You just kind of type it in and say, I want this, and it's going to give you your closest options. We want an Azure OpenAI resource, which I think was gated at the time we gave this, but I don't think it's gated anymore. I think anybody can spin one up.
I believe so. It might be region based or bound.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But it shouldn't be gated. I don't think
that's a good tip. So this shows it in East US, but some of the, you know, more notable regions, I guess, you do run into capacity issues with these sometimes. So sometimes it's worthwhile to spin it up in a region that you don't have a lot of stuff in. Because a lot of other people probably don't have a lot of stuff in it either, and it may have more headroom. I haven't run into that a lot, but I've seen it a couple times.
I haven't either, but I also haven't like hammered the crap out of it. So right. my demos have been very, very minor in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. And this one is too. We're not dealing with tons and tons of data here. So we've gone through all that. Create button's been clicked. The deployment happens. This does happen pretty quick. I feel like this was probably edited and spun up a little fast, but it's really not too much worse than that. Just edited for TV here. So it's spun up. So now we're going into the resource itself, and we're looking around at stuff. So one of the things, as you kind of follow the mouse, you may see is we're going for, we're pulling out the endpoints and the keys, which, if you're not familiar with that kind of Azure terminology, that's more or less, well, it's not really used. Like a key is like the password. The endpoint is basically the URL that you're going to use to connect to this stuff. And now we're picking the embedding model. So if you know a lot about this, you may be sitting there and say, that model's no good, that model's out of date, or there's something cooler. That may very well be true. The demo itself is really built around this model. So at the time this was created, which was last December, this was the proper model for this. But bear in mind, these will change a lot. That screen is never the same when you go to it, basically. And so, yeah, you see that you're kind of getting a tour of the screen here. There's the endpoint, there's the key. I know at some points there has been an issue where if you didn't click the I next to the key, it wouldn't copy it right. I believe that's been fixed. But if you have an issue copy and pasting the key somewhere else, click the I so you can see it and then copy it from there. And because we're using very state-of-the-art stuff, super futuristic AI things, make sure you've got Notepad open to copy and paste the endpoint and key, because we're going to need that for some of the T-SQL later.
Yep, that's a great note.
I mean, we need to use state-of-the-art stuff. So
yeah,
why don't we do that? So
yeah, because
we've got a resource spun up, so we're ready to do all the T-SQL bits. That's as Azure Portal-y as we're going to get. And now we'll be off to T-SQL and Fabric SQL. And John is going to take over from here and kind of give us the next part of the tour.
Yep. We're going to talk about vector databases. I did want to note about the OpenAI, the embedding model that we saw in the demo. We use that embedding model to create the vectors, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that our AI stuff is going to utilize. That's what that embedding model is. There's also ChatGPT models that we can then use you can deploy that in your OpenAI resource and then use that chat deployment to actually communicate with your data. If we have time at the very end, I have another demo that I built that showcases all of those together that we can look at if we have time. But so we're going to now talk about vectors and embeddings. As Matt had mentioned at the start of this, previously other platforms like Cosmos and Mongo, you would see those vectors stored in a third-party platform somewhere else. You'd have to create those vectors and embeddings and put them off to the side. So that, again, that comes back to the message about Microsoft bringing it in-house to SQL, the platform we all know and love. We make money off of SQL. And so we now have a vector data type where we can store these vectors. And vectors are really just a numeric representation of properties of something. So like if we look at the picture of the dog on the right-hand side, we can see that it's brown, it's furry, it's short, it's tall, it's heavy, it's light, all those type of attributes. And then numerically, we can send those attributes to the embedding model that we just created in our OpenAI session, and we will get back an array basically of numbers. Those numbers are complete gibberish for us humans, but computers can decipher and interpret those numbers, and we can use those numbers to determine what it really means. Right? We can use those numbers to do a similarity search using cosine. Do you remember back, at least, I don't know about you, Matt, but in my high school, like I remember sitting in my algebra class, my calculus class going, I'm never going to use cosine. I'm never going to use trigonometry. Well, we do. Now we do.
So my teacher was right when they said
well,
they said you're going to use it every day. That hasn't been true, but you're telling me that now we do need to remember it a little bit.
Yeah. So I have to do a shout out to Mr. Mike Pauly, my high school, who was probably my best favorite math teacher in the whole wide world. You are right, Mr. Pauly. I have to use cosine now. So as you can see here on this screen, if we look at the words apple and banana, they've got an array, and that array is I view it as an array. If you look at the documentation or you talk to people at Microsoft, they're going to call it a vector. The vector really is just a comma delimited array. So like 10 and 50, 12 and 48 represent apple and banana, whereas dog and cat, you get 48 and 12 and 50 and 10. So using cosine, we can then do some math and determine the similarity. The closer that it is, 0.4 is closer in similarity. I'm sorry, not similar, not close. We can do math to determine whether or not two values are close to each other or similar to each other, right? So we can do that with those, like here, similarity 99. It's very, very similar. So a dog and a cat are more similar than a dog and a banana, or a cat and an apple. So we can vectorize our data through that embedding model and then use cosine uh, in SQL now, in Azure SQL database, to determine whether or not things are similar, right?
Yeah, and that covers a range basically from 1 to -1. So
Yes.
1, if you look it up in the docs, they'll tell you 1 is like these things are the same thing. -1 is these things are definitely the opposite thing. And then of course the range between there is how similar and close it is.
Yep. And the example is like, why do we want vectors in a modern relational database? And the way that I look at this is always in terms of like when I go to a new city or I'm visiting a new town and I want to look up on Google Maps, hey, I want a restaurant within 5 kilometers that might be seafood or barbecue that has a good review. We can do all sorts of various searches, whether it's like in this example, an equality search for Seattle, a geospatial search on a geography data type within X number of miles or a radius, or we can do a regex search of it's a family place or it's an adult place or kids only or whatever. And so we want to be able to bring those vectors to our relational database because then we can do our own searches internally. We don't need a third-party database to facilitate that. We can actually do it through T-SQL, kind of like how Matt mentioned.
Yeah. And if you think about it, what's over there on the left is essentially a natural language query. It's kind of chopped up because it's showing you the different types of searches you might need to do, but that's a normal sentence you might say. Hey, I'm in Seattle. Kilometers I wouldn't use, but whatever. I want a restaurant within this distance, this kind of food, this kind of atmosphere. It needs to be good. That's a pretty normal search. But it's more of a natural language one. Like I would prefer not to write a bunch of SQL to make that happen. I just want to ask my phone.
Yeah, well, and if you think about it, when you go to your phone, like you pull up Google Maps and you start clicking of all the various objects that you want to search on, I suspect behind the scenes, Google issues a more naturalized query, right? Where this equals Seattle, where our geospatial searches within, and then you might use kilometers if you attend Vienna. Just saying, if you attend the FabCon in Vienna, you might use kilometers.
They don't use freedom units there. It's all the units of measure that makes sense.
Yes. And so like if we tack on the word teriyaki, we can include that in our review text, and we can take that review text, embed it, create vectors off of it, and then use teriyaki to find things that are similar to teriyaki in the review to find the best restaurants in Vienna that might offer teriyaki type dishes that we want to go sample, because who doesn't? And so this is why I think that Microsoft is really smart to bring vectors and AI into the database, because it really facilitates a better quality of interaction with your own data. You don't have to farm this out to third party anymore. You can do it right there in your database. And the other beauty is with the vectors, and we'll get to, we'll show you this in T-SQL and the whole thing.
Yeah.
As data changes, you can now update your embeddings on the fly, right? So if the words change in your tables, you can call out to, I'm not sure I would do this, but as an example, don't do this in production, then say that John did this. You can have a trigger. Yep, triggers, I know, to update that embedding to reflect the new value right there in your database, right? So again, bringing the vector data type and the ability to interact with that to the database, I think is really, really smart.
Well, and the other thing it helps us as data people, it helps us consolidate our authority a little bit.
Yep.
We can, you can take a lot of the stuff you're going to learn, hopefully you've learned so far, but from this point forward in the demos and things like that, you'll have kind of the beginnings of a shell of an app that it doesn't have to be restaurants or sessions for a conference or anything like that, but you're going to have the building blocks to know how to do this. So you don't need to go talk to your app dev team necessarily. say, well, I need your help to do this. Like you are going to be able to do and control a lot of this. So as data people, for job security and other reasons, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I used in the demos that I built, I use a Star Wars data set. So I don't use restaurants or anything because I'm a nerd, right? If I had access to like Doctor Who, I'd use Doctor Who, but I used a Star Wars data set to build this, and I have embeddings around like the planets, the various planets that are used in the Star Wars movie trilogies that I can go do searches on, and I'll show you if we have time.
Yeah.
But here we can see we can do a similarity search on like chicken, teriyaki, different spellings, teriyaki sauce, whatever. And then we can get our results back as to which restaurants do we want to go to. So
yeah. So you can see it's kind of putting together like every type of database search you might want, packaging it up and calling it a hybrid search because we've added the similarity search to everything else. Sorry, John.
No, that's fine. Carl and Chad just asked if I used parsecs for distance, and I may or may not have actually used that at some point in time in the demo.
I like it.
But this slide, I know this slide says soon. I'm pretty sure, did they GA this? I can't remember. I think it's.
To be honest, I'm not clear on that. I think there are elements of this that are still very soon.
Okay,
I don't know if it's all out the door yet.
So the soon might be still relevant, but this is how. And somebody asked in chat. Ashley asked, like, how does this all work natively within T-SQL? So you can see that this is just SQL. It's just T-SQL that we know and love. We declare a new data type called vector. There is an upper bounds to that number, that 1536. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember what that upper bound is, but there's an upper boundary in terms of the number of elements within that array, because it is stored behind the scenes as a var binary. But so we can declare that vector data type, meaning that SQL then knows we're going to store that array of gibberish mathematical entries that it can go use to do something. That's right. So we can create the embedding. We can use the OpenAI with that embedding model, send it some data. It's going to come back with that array of numbers, however big we define the array to be, that's what's going to come back. And then we can use a new function called vector distance and tell it cosine there in the green highlighted, where we can then compare two different semantic values and get back a distance that we had talked about a couple slides before, right? So Matt said -1 to 1. The closer to 1 means it's more similar. -1 is probably further away, if I remember my trigonometry. From our data, right? So we can actually send our live data from our tables to the model, get a value, bring it back, and then compare those two values in the data that's in the table already. So, and this is just T-SQL, right? So we can do this from T-SQL. We can create the embeddings. I've got code that I can show you that we can actually create the embeddings as well. We can call that REST endpoint. As Matt mentioned, that's one of the new things in Azure SQL Database is that you can call out to a REST API endpoint from the database in T-SQL. So that endpoint that was created in the OpenAI, we can use T-SQL to call that REST API endpoint, get the embedding, and bring it back and store it. And then we can do this comparison right here in T-SQL that we all know and love. It's great stuff. SQL Fabric, we all know that SQL in Fabric is the new and improved thing that has recently come out. So we do have vector support in Fabric. So if you're using SQL Fabric right now, you can do this. You can also do it in Azure SQL Database. So we have a new data type. You can do some things with it. You can cast it. So you can do a cast from one value to the other. Like one thing you can't do is like you can't do a convert. You can't change that data type. Once it's a vector data type, it's pretty much stuck there.
You're locked in. Yeah.
Yeah, you're locked in. So be aware as to that. You do have some new functions, vector norm, vector normalize, and vector distance. The vector norm and vector normalize all deal with basically mathematical values. I have not seen those used in the wild yet. The one that I have seen is the vector distance.
Yeah.
To use the cosine to determine the similarities of two values. So I haven't seen normal normalize, but they're there. If you are a total nerd, you can go see it, the mathematical values. A couple of use cases. We kind of talked about the use cases already. We showed like the doing the Google Map search type of thing. The demo I built, I used Star Wars data where I look for, show me all the planets where a winter battle might be, preferred for the Republic because, I'm sorry, the Rebellion, because I'm the Rebellion. Yeah, I'm not the Republic. I'm the Rebellion.
You don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah, I know, right? So you can use it to have natural language conversations like what Matt mentioned with your data to, what would be the best planet to fight in AT-AT, right? And so I can get that data back and use that semantic search capabilities with the AI, and it'll spit out, okay, you need to go on this planet because it's hilly. If you're not familiar with what an AT-AT is, it's a really big tank-looking thing with 4 legs. Walking in hills, it's not going to do well. Or it actually came back and said, go on this planet because this planet is mostly ocean and those things won't function underwater, which I thought was really cool. But we've all seen that. So let's talk about connecting to OpenAI. We kind of mentioned it already. I think this is still me. Yes, this is still me.
Yes, yep.
So here's a demo, and this is more of the T-SQL that shows the actual action of using T-SQL to connect and make the connectivity from the Azure SQL database to the OpenAI. You can see on the screen, we need that endpoint. You can see on line 10, there's a marker there for the endpoint and the key. We do have to create a credential in the database, and that's how SQL Server will authenticate to the OpenAPI endpoint, is via that credential. So you can see there on line 10, it's going to create a database scoped credential. So I'm going to go ahead and start this. It's the same thing. If you're familiar with creating credential, and they're doing this in Fabric, but you can do it in Azure SQL Database as well.
Exact same thing. Yep.
Exact same thing. So here's the endpoint that was created from creating the embedding deployment. The operator is going to drop in that endpoint right there in that create credential T-SQL statement. They're going to go back and get the key, which the key, like Matt said, is the password to the REST API endpoint.
And if you note, they also chopped off everything in the URI after the main stuff. Yeah. Super secret.
So we got the
password.
key. Yep, super secret. So they're going to create this credential, and they probably was paused, so I had to come online. So now the credential is created. Now we can reference that REST API endpoint for OpenAI in our other T-SQL. So at the very top here, they're going to change the marker for endpoint and include the endpoint that they needed. I will tell you, like in my playing around with this, you have to pay attention to which API version is tacked on there, because there are different versions. And if they change the version, you have to go change your T-SQL code.
And they change a lot.
They do change a lot. And I actually ran into it. It took me forever to figure out what was going on, but they changed the API version.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing here is they're now going to send data. They're going to send the word nature to the embedding model, and they're going to get back a bunch of numbers, as you can see down below. It's just an array of numbers that mean absolutely nothing to us, unless you're a cyborg and can process that.
That would be awesome.
That would be totally awesome, right?
Yeah.
But now we have that embedding, and you can take that value and store it. So we create that vector data type in our tables, and now we can store that value and then use it with the natural language T-SQL OpenAPI stuff, right? And I think that's the demo. That is the demo.
Yep, that's pretty much it.
Pretty much it.
All right, so we had a couple questions in the chat. Is like, where does all this come together? So we've kind of laid the mathematical, we've laid kind of the product groundwork. Like, why is there AI stuff in my SQL stuff? We've laid the mathematical groundwork, kind of by math. How does it work? How does this enhance queries and all of that? But we got a couple questions like, when do we do the database stuff with it? Now. basically. So this is where it all comes together. So that demo stops where we've created the embedding for certain things, and we've stored those. So we've gone over the data types and all that. So if memory serves, then the next demo is basically using a notebook to do the same thing. So before you hit play there, John, let's do 30 seconds on why notebooks are cool. So if you're not familiar with those and you're a kind of a diehard SSMS person, never used Azure Data Studio, may it rest in peace, or don't know what notebooks are at all, or your data science friends are like, man, notebooks are amazing, and you've not asked them what those are. What they are, you can kind of see it here. So we've got a nice kind of headline. We've got a cell with some text, so just basically instructions. And then there's code. So if you think about the ways you could use this, like when I was an operational
Run books.
Oh my goodness. Like any operational DBA task that I had to hand to somebody else or create for overnight support or, junior DBAs or whatever, what was it? Like a Word document or a spreadsheet with a checklist, notepad, or, a SharePoint list, something. This, you could just say, here is what we're doing. Here's why. And that can be text, and then code, and then it will run. And it also persists the results as well. So
into the notebook.
Definite plug for notebooks here. They are awesome. I believe this one's in VS Code. Azure Data Studio, of course, still works, but is being
deprecated.
I still use
I'm sad.
Yeah, I am too. But notebooks are awesome. So if you take nothing else away from this and think all this AI stuff is dumb, notebooks are cool. So
yes,
now we can go ahead and roll on here. So what this notebook is doing, kind of like it says, is it's creating the database objects to leverage the vector types we kind of went over and called out. So it's installing a couple of extensions just so it can do what it can do. So you can kind of see it going through there. It's saying, okay, you told me to install this package I have. You told me to install this extension. I'm going to. You do get some IntelliSense kind of live tooltips there, which is cool too, just explaining what the different parameters are. And then so it kind of starts off. So we're getting our connection string there. Again, this is edited for TV a bit, so this part goes pretty fast. So we've put it in there, and you see you click play next to each cell. So there's a way to run the entire notebook all at once. But if you want to run individual cells, you can click play, and they'll run kind of one at a time here. So we've gone back and done that. And so now what this does is we've got a stored procedure to update the session embedding. So there are already sessions in here, but let's update it with the embeddings that are passing. So we're calling basically to update just the pure session data that we had. There's a mention there briefly of a bug that I believe has been resolved now. So you may see it use varchar max in one part where it should be using vector, and it should be doing that now. I do see a question in the chat. So I believe the link to all this stuff, if you go back to the original Microsoft Learn Live stuff, I think the link to the resources is off that. Because this is a video, so we don't have the notebook that we're showing. But I believe the link to the resources ends up at the end of the Learn Live stuff.
Yeah, real quick, I will say also, you had mentioned Davide in the chat.
Yeah,
he does have a GitHub repo that he has a full-blown this whole thing, not the notebook, but he's got the T-SQL. Like he walks you through step by step on how to set this up and configure it with data. Well, I think it's Walmart data. But if you find him on GitHub, if you can't, let me know. I think I've got a link somewhere.
Yeah,
it's actually a really good demo that you can download and walk all the way through this. So it'll show you
awesome.
like creating the vector data types, doing the embeddings, doing the whole thing.
Yeah, and if you're really kind of captured with like AI and SQL stuff and think that's cool, Davide is the guy. He's the guy that's pushing this forward within Microsoft. Great person to follow. If you want to know what the breaking news is in this space, he's the guy.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. So what this is doing now, it's inserting into sessions some session stuff. These are obviously people that submitted sessions in plenty of time and not right before the deadline, because none of us ever submit sessions to events minutes before it closes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I never do that.
Yeah, I never do that either.
I did it last night, in fact.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, so if you may be wondering, you're like, hey, we're not opening up Azure Data Studio or Management Studio or even VS Code here to do any of this. This is the query editor for SQL in Fabric. This experience has come a long way. So if you used the
Yeah, it
query
has.
editor in Azure SQL a long time ago and you're like, everybody was like, they really have listened to feedback on this stuff. And, is it a one for one with a really powerful tool like SSMS? Probably not, but it's really good for stuff like this. If you're just doing a lot of ad hoc stuff, it works well. So we've run this query here, so it gives us back our session information, and you'll see we've got the embeddings that was over at the far right, and now we've gone for speakers. You see the embeddings are over there as well. Obviously, not human readable in any way at all. And if you'll also note as it kind of hops around, there is a kind of a flag, like a bit column to require embeddings update. It will throw that to basically say, hey, there's some updated data here and the embeddings need to update. And then that stored proc will kick off. Like I said, this does move kind of fast. So if you want to follow this kind of at your own pace, Davide's GitHub has the whole thing. And then you can follow along at whatever speed you want to run at. So really what we're doing here is basically, as you can see, we're just kind of going through each thing and making sure kind of that every use case is covered. Are we updating embeddings for new submissions? Have we updated embeddings for old one? And all we're trying to enable is make sure this app has all of the data that it needs to do the hybrid search that we want it to do. So we're not just searching on elements we have, like speaker name, maybe abstract text, something like that. We're also getting that richer content to show me like what sessions are similar to other sessions where we might not be able to write a simple T-SQL query to get that. The embeddings and AI stuff is going to help us do all that here. And now we're going to use Copilot, which I don't love, but there it is.
And Fabric, if you haven't seen Fabric real quick, there you can see that open in button at the top. You can actually open up a connection from Azure Data Studio or Management Studio to your database in Fabric.
Yeah.
But there you can see our embeddings.
Yep. Yeah. So
Hey,
what
guys,
that did
10
is it
minutes.
took it from the vector that it's stored at.
Got it.
Yeah, it took it from the vector it's stored at to a JSON array, so we can kind of see it there.
Oh, that was the last demo.
That's the last demo. So we do have time for questions. We've tried to field them in the chat as best we can.
Ashley, let me see if I can find Davide's repo real quick. Or
I was gonna say, John, if you want me to do that, we've got 10 minutes. Your Star Wars demo should take about 5. You want to run through that and kind of show a non-edited for TV way to kind of package all this up?
Sure. So, as I had kind of mentioned, let me bring up. Okay, so in this demo, I'm basically going to show you almost the exact same thing that we talked about for the past hour. I do have an OpenAI Azure resource deployed. I've got it in a resource group. I have deployed 2 different models here. You can see that I have a retirement date for these models. So eventually, sometime later this year, these particular models will go away. And then you have to go update things in T-SQL when that happens. I've got a GPT-4, which is basically a chat GTP model that I can then interact with my data and ask it real-time questions. And I have a embedding model there in the second row. And I use that model to create my actual embeddings, okay? So I have because I'm a Star Wars nerd, I'm just a nerd overall. I have an Azure SQL instance called Rebellion Alliance. And for those of you didn't know, those names have to be globally unique. And so like I own Starship Enterprise. Nobody else can have that server name in all of Azure. I have, huh?
Nicely done.
Yeah. So back in the day when the internet was born, if you remember domain squatting, people would buy domains like IBM.com, and then IBM would want that and want to sell it. Well, now I have Rebellion Alliance, and I also have like Star Wars and Naboo. Hold on, yeah, I'm a nerd. Anyways, I have a database called Rebel Forces, and Matt had mentioned it. There's actually an online site called, I think it's called Craggle, where they had
Kaggle.
yeah, Kaggle.
Yeah.
Oh, Kaggle.
Yeah.
Craggle is from the Lego movie. So Kaggle offers up a bunch of public data sets on all sorts of stuff. But they actually had a Star Wars data set that, as you can see on the left of my tables, it lists the battles, the characters, the cities, the droids, the whole gambit. It's not a ton of data. And one of the things I will say about using the vectorized data, the more data you have, the better odds of getting accurate results. So in the demo that I have here, I'm going to use the planets. There's very few rows in this table. So sometimes it doesn't get it quite right. There's only 13 rows. So if I had 1,000 rows, the AI generated stuff would be better. But in my case, I've only got 13 to play with. But what I did was I noticed that the planets table, the data, had a terrain value, right? So if we look at this, and I just closed it, but I want to do it again. If we look over here, it's got a whole slew of attributes, diameter, the name, but we have a terrain. So we can see it's a desert planet. It's got ocean, it's got rock, deserts, whatever. So I thought I would vectorize that. And so what I did was I added a column called in vector. We can see that I have a vector data type right here. I tied in the T-SQL to my embedding through a credential. We saw how to create that credential to the embedding model. And then I rotated through in batches and created that embedding. So if I look at that, we can see that I've got all these embeddings, right? So this is all numeric values that mean nothing to me, but the computer can generate stuff. So now that I have that, if I come down and say, hey, I want to find all the planets that might host sea life because I want a water-based or an oceanic-based planet, I can take the word sea life, send it to my embedding via the store procedure. So I created a store procedure that would take a parameter and send it to the embedding model, bring it back, and I can compare it. And then I use cosine to determine that. So if I run this, now remember, I've only got 13 rows to play with, but it came back with 3 planets. Como, I'm not sure how to pronounce that planet name in Star Wars, but that planet is the most similar to having sea life, and the terrain that is listed is ocean. So that makes sense. And so using the embeddings and whatnot and using cosine, thank you, Mr. Polly, for trigonometry, I can now determine that that planet is probably the best planet if I want to go fight a water-based battle with the Republic. Now, we talked about natural language, and I got like 3 minutes left. In this example, I'm taking the exact same vectorized data that I now want to ask a natural language question of. And let's say, the Republic has these things called AT-ATs. They're basically like 4-legged Sherman tanks. If I wanted to have a battle with the Republic to ensure that they don't have those Sherman tanks available because I want to win this battle, I'm going to ask ChatGTP or the GPT model of my OpenAI that question, and then I tell it how to come back. I tell the API, you are a system assistant who helps with the Rebel Alliance to fight battles against the Republic. We're going to send in this message format, and you're going to return a JSON object in this format, and then go do your thing, right? So I'm going to ask GPT that question using my vectorized data. Did it pause? It might have paused. Oh,
I think it did,
so,
yeah.
So real quick, so now we can see that AI has determined. Let's see if I can paste this. Oh, it won't. Why can't I copy this? There we go. Because I can't function a computer today, apparently. These 2 planets would be the worst planets for an AT-AT because they're pretty much all ocean. a Sherman tank isn't going to be functional in an ocean, right? So I think it's really cool that AI was able to take my natural language question, interpret it, do a comparison with my vectorized data and whatnot, and then return an answer. So now I know where I need to go fight the Republic, so they can't use AT-ATs. So that's the demo. That's kind of, I know it's a nerdy type of demo, but that's the demo, and that's how
the building blocks well.
Yes,
like you've got data that's easy to understand. You asked a question that's understandable. If we ever have to fight a oceanic war with,
I know
with AT-ATs.
I was trying to come up with like what are some oddball questions that we could ask, but that's the demo. I'm happy to. I think I'm happy if you want this demo. Send me an email at john@dcac.com or through Paresh or somebody.
Can you just type it in here? That will.
I don't. I need to upload it to GitHub, but I'm happy to do that later today and then send you a link.
Okay.
We can put it in the chat or whatever. Cool. So with that, I think we're back to rounding out the slides.
We are.
Cool. So I'll just finish it out. These are the upcoming dates as we talked about. Make sure you stay tuned with this user group. They do a great job of bringing great content to the community. Today was April 9th, where Matt and I talked about AI and SQL's vector functionality. Coming up next, April 3rd, and then a couple weeks later is May 14th and May 28th. I will say that they're all great sessions. I've heard great things of Ginger and Monica's session on the 28th, the developer-centric query and performance monitoring. I attended that session. It was a great session. So, and then of course, if you happen to like to travel and want to submit, you got 9 days left. If you want to be a speaker at an international conference, go to Vienna. You can sign up. That registration link will take you to the site. You can go visit Belvedere, Vienna. Probably have some great food, maybe some teriyaki somewhere. That conference is September 15th through the September 18th. I don't think they've been announced yet, but I suspect, don't hold me to this, there'll be pre-cons and maybe post-cons before and after the event. I don't know for sure, but that's typically what they do.
Yeah.
So if you want
pre-cons in Europe last year, so I would imagine they'd follow the same model.
I went to the one in Stockholm, and it was just like the one in Vegas. It was phenomenal. I loved it. Microsoft did a great job of putting on the conference. So if you want to go to a really good conference, that is definitely one that you should look at. And of course, it's Vienna. Like, who doesn't want to go to Vienna?
Awesome. Do the Sound of Music tour also, right?
Yeah, right.
There you go.
Yeah. I would sing, but you really don't want me to sing right now. You know, the hills are alive with music. You know,
no, that's
probably in the
Salzburg.
session before
Thanks,
John
Julie.
starts singing.
Thanks, Julie.
Wrong place. It's Salzburg.
So,
okay.
I think we're like 90 seconds over, but I think that's it. Matt, you got anything else to add?
No. Thanks for coming. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have questions for us, please connect on LinkedIn and all that. We've done our best to kind of monitor chat, but if we missed anybody, we're always happy to talk about this stuff. Always.
So just before we wrap up, right, I just reposted the DBA-VUG YouTube channel. So this should be there before the weekend, the recording, and which I am about to stop now. But if you guys have any questions, you know where to reach out to us, DBA-VUG at